Comics. Indie Comics.
Welcome to ORP, otherwise known as Omen Revelations Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Nunley.
And I'm your co-host, Steve Sellers. On ORP, we like to talk about geek stuff, pop culture, including movies and TV series, as well as comic books and comic characters. But that's not all, is it, Mike?
No, it's not, Steve. We're also writers for Omen Comics and Revelation Comics. So we like to talk about both writing and our comics. So podcast and chill with us. In our fifth Indie Comics Creator Spotlight, Steve and I are talking with fellow Wicked Crew member Cody Fernandez of Ironverse Comics and the creator-writer of Jack Irons' Steel Cowboy comic book series that is currently running an Indiegogo campaign for issue number 4 of the series. Why don't you say hi, Cody?
Howdy, folks.
So let's just get right into this. I have a two-part question for you, Cody.
All right.
I know from previous talks that you've been working on this story for quite a while, and I was hoping you could tell us both what your inspirations were for Jack Irons and the Ironverse, and if you could describe the creation process from those inspirations to the actual script itself for issue number 1.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a lot of meat there, so I'm happy to get into it. So let's see. Inspiration. Let's start there. So Jack himself was kind of the character, the idea, the genesis of what I do, was from the transition from childhood to adulthood and the growing awareness of the human experience and human condition, history, and all that weight, and figuring out how to continue moving forward with that and maybe leave the place a little bit better than you found it. And So that's like the initial bit, but then what that manifested as, of course, from actual direct influences, right? So one good example that kind of had it at its core is the anime series Samurai Jack. It also features a character with many cultures coming together into a single individual, training a single individual to face a great evil, in that case a coup, some kind of demonic wizard. With Ironverse Comics, it was kind of similar. It was in this case, however, that transition from childhood to adulthood, that weight of human experience and the human condition, for me, it was how I wanted to tackle it, and came in 2 parts. First part was putting the weight of history and all of that in it, both the good, the bad, both perpetrating it and being victimized by it, into a single individual. So that's the reincarnated bit where he has many lives that have fallen on both of those spectrums. And then the second part was, well, if you were burdened with that life and you remembered it so much, why wouldn't you want to move on? And so in Jack's case, I made it so he couldn't move on. I made him immortal in this final life. So he's stuck with coping it. He's stuck with watching humankind kind of break down and make mistakes again and again, make the same mistakes, right? And with that, and his Aku, his great enemy, and it's not just him, it's Ironverse's great enemy. The 4 pillars of Ironverse Comics are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. They're kind of almost a Lovecraftian gods that manifest on a planet when enough of their namesakes, enough famine and suffering, or enough warfare, or enough nasty science, or enough death have occurred in a sentient species history to their civilizations, right? They rip their way into reality and seek to perpetuate themselves. They The best way is they want to be the only game in town, and even amongst each other. So the three main brothers tend to war amongst itself, war, famine, and plague. And Death kind of is a little bit less. I'm pretty sure he knows his end game, so he's not so worried about it, and tend to see less of him. But other influences, of course, you'll see spaghetti western influences from Clint Eastwood films. You'll see some anime influences, particularly some Cowboy Bebop and Trigun. You'll see some Mad Max was a big one. Comics wise, you'll see Jonah Hex. You'll see a little bit of Punisher. You see a little bit of Hellblazer in terms of how we handle occult themes. You'll see a whole bunch of those influences, things that I took to heart and then wanted to adjust for what I'm trying to accomplish with Ironverse Comics.
Well, yeah, I think I have noticed some of those while reading this, and I will say, like, I noticed early on, Cody, how much you love westerns, and I think definitely the Clint Eastwood thing is in there, and it comes through in Jack Irons, and that's a strong part of the appeal for him to me, because I'm a huge Western fan myself. So the passion for the Western mythos is one of those things that I really appreciate about the series. So what makes a good Western for you? Are there any particular Westerns that you're drawn to, or any Westerns that, other than Clint Eastwood, that were an influence on Jack Irons specifically?
Well, again, in a way, Cowboy Bebop has those elements, and again, Trigun is that too. I like weird westerns quite a bit. A lot of samurai films. Again, Samurai Jack. It's the core of westerns that I've come across, and some people who have studied them have brought it up. But one of the core themes is a dead man's walk. And so I gave an immortal a dead man's walk. I thought that was kind of fun. But the concept is something. It's like a hero's journey, but with the tragedy built in at the beginning instead of simply a calling. It's usually, it can be a stranger wandering into town, right? And then solving that town and then wandering back out. And you don't really know much more about him, just the actions he did. That's always great. And a lot of the Clint Eastwood Man with No Name trilogy is like that. There's a lot of those elements, right? But specifically, like, I pull from so much that it's kind of hard to pin anything down specifically. Besides the Clint Eastwood westerns, Silverado is a classic I love, and I try to have a little bit of upbeat kind of flavor like that, so I don't wallow too much in the heavier side of the work. Let's see. They always, like, when I'm called to bring things to mind, they always dodge my neurons always dodge it. There are others, but they're not jumping to mind right now. It's really just Paul. Dances with Wolves was a massive influence for me forever. That one finally got to me. There's been quite a few. Dances with Wolves in particular, the bridging of cultures, and then the tragedies that are built into the West, of course, and there's quite a few. The Lone Ranger is a big one in issue 3. It's pretty much I'm riffing on the Lone Ranger the whole issue. There's quite a few. There's quite a few, but that's probably what I can pull out from the top of my head. Gunsmoke comes up quite a bit. I mean, I could probably keep at it for a while, but that'll do. I can give folks a taste.
All right. Yeah, I like some of those. I'm curious about I've heard a lot of, shall we say, split opinions about Dances with Wolves. And I'm just curious, are you one of those director's cut, got to watch the whole thing kind of people, or are you a theatrical cut kind of guy?
I've only seen it at whatever massive length it is, so I can't tell you the difference. So I'm assuming that's director's cut. I've never seen it labeled director's cut in anything I've seen, and it's a long film, so I can't tell you. But yeah, I'm for the full film. I don't know what scenes are cut or not for theatrical, so I couldn't tell you. There's a great example of that, though, like night and day. That making a difference is that Ben Affleck Daredevil movie. It's night and day between the director's cut and the original, and the director's cut I really, really enjoy.
Oh, huge difference between those two for sure. So, as a guy who writes his own comics, and I started my own little label, I got a question for you. Um, you came up with this great idea for Jack Irons, and you got this cool story and the Ironverse going, but now you got to put a team together to make it happen. I know that I went through about 4 or 5 roster changes before I found the perfect team with Omen Comics, and I'd like to hear how those early years of putting a team together went for you. I mean, how did you meet the team you have now?
All right. Well, there's quite a few steps there as well. So, when I started this, and it was about 17 years ago, again, I was writing this during that transitionary period of my life. I kind of just wrote it. I started writing comic scripts once I kind of saw the potential of comics and the quite unlimited potential. I had started with playwriting and script writing. So it was kind of similar in terms of how you can structure a script as well, which was nice. It was an easy transition. And I prefer that kind of writing to prose or even short story kind of writing. But from there, I kind of sat on it for a while. And then a certain opportunity presented itself. It was a sad opportunity, but it was an opportunity. Make something good out of something bad. And I needed to put some positive energy into it. And so I had this project that had sat for quite some time. Jack Irons sitting there. I was like, well, you know what? Hey, I have a chance to get a little bit of money and try this out. And I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a relatively young man jumping into a business I have no business jumping into and having no idea how to do it. So I go online, I look on how to break into comics, and the number one thing you'll always hear, and I would still say is true, but doesn't sound very helpful to somebody who doesn't understand, is the only way you break into comics is to make comics.
Totally.
Yeah, it's when you're looking into it and trying to figure out, like, but how do I make it? How do I make comics? And nobody will tell you. It's like, and so I go look in, I try to contact some artists, and I contact them, and we start discussing. And then anytime like rates or anything would come up, I'd get ghosted, and I wouldn't even be told like that's too low or I can't work for that. I just get ghosted. So I wasn't learning anything in that way, and so I kind of got sick of that. And I was like, okay, well that doesn't work. I'm in a really nice artistic kind of community up here in northern New Mexico. Maybe there's somebody here I can meet. So I try the one place that I could figure out that I bought stuff off of a few times is Craigslist. So I go ahead and put up an ad for an illustrator on Craigslist for this. And lo and behold, a couple weeks in, a amazing talent, Maxi Dallo, an Argentinian talent, contacts me through there. And he happens to be up in this area. He has family down in Santa Fe, and he has friends up here. So he comes up here, here and there. A little bit less the last few years, but he does come up here and there. And the timing worked out. He was interested. Argentina doesn't really have a comic book industry. It has amazing talents, wonderful talents, but it doesn't really have the business backbone to keep that up. So he was mainly doing children's books and other kinds of illustrations, and he did a little bit of art teaching too. And this guy was 2 years younger than me as well. It was quite ahead of the game compared to this random kid who got a hold of him. Anyway, so through Craigslist, we're chatting, and then we end up meeting at McDonald's. He brings his portfolio and wonderful, beautiful art, and I bring my really kind of shoddy scripts, and we talk it out. We feel each other out. And then I give him a copy of the script, and then he comes back. I think it was within a week or a couple of days. I couldn't tell which. He has the initial kind of sketches, ideas, and then we talk about rate, and we sign a contract. And we've been working together for like the last 7 years since. So that was kind of the genesis of it. That was really the start of it. And then since then, we got the line art for issue number 1 done, and I did some very bad lettering. At the time, I thought it was fine. I didn't understand what I was doing. The next team member that came along was when I pitched it with my bad lettering for 2 to 4 years. I'm thinking 3. where I was pitching it to publishers and stuff. Again, I have no idea how to break into comics, so I'm just going through motions that I can understand to figure it out. And of course, no responses. I got one publisher from England who actually at least acknowledged that he read it and enjoyed it, but it's not the kind of book that his company publishes. So that was nice. After like years, you get one response, and at least he's like, "Hey, this is good."
You know?
Yeah, exactly. And
You
so,
only need one.
Yeah, it's really rare you'll get a response from submissions anymore, and that's kind of too bad. It used to be like a point of pride for a lot of publishing companies, and now they just either don't have the time or just don't want to deal with the headache, and a lot of people lose out. But I guess I get it. But nonetheless, I gave up on that. That ended up being disheartening after a while. I was like, no movement or whatever. So then I'm like, okay, well, I'll just put it up for free and start sharing it, because at least it'll be seen then, right? And the effort doesn't go to waste. And so I do that, and I start posting on Reddit, just trying to get any kind of movement. And again, self-promo on Reddit is usually a no-no, but I lucked out, and a letterer found us, and he's like, I love the story. I love the art. Your lettering is terrible. Please let me letter this. And I'm like, well, you know what you're doing. Please do. and so he goes ahead and does it. And then we get a better lettering bit. And he's like, yeah, just now kind of check this out. And so I have this now properly lettered black and white issue. And the next bit from there, I think I still try and get it read. And then I get kind of disappointed by the amount of traction I'm getting. And so I finally take the plunge into social media, which I did not ever want to do. But I knew it was well, you know what? Actually, there's a step in between that. Once we had the black and white issue with the better lettering, I ran a crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo. It was 2 months, and I got $10, I think, one backer. And that was the call that got me to join social media. I was like, well, that doesn't work. This isn't just going to happen without me doing more legwork somehow. So that's when I bit that bullet. And then that next campaign, beginning of 2018, I want to say, and I had a Twitter account, which was kind of the first thing I was on. I was on Facebook as well. I still don't get Facebook, but I got on Twitter, and around that time there was a growing awareness of indie comics and just folks trying to look for things outside of the mainstream, and we happened to have something of somewhat quality, if I dare say, and people noticed, and so I interacted properly, and I ran another crowdfunding campaign. During that campaign, we got quite a bit of awareness, and I would link people to the issue, right? So I wasn't just showing panels. I wasn't just like talking about something I'm going to do. It's like, you can go read it. And if you want to support our work, you can come on in and help us do this. Let's make the line art for issue number 2. I'm ready to do number 2. And so I'm running this campaign for that. And eventually some of our art, one of our full pages, finds its way to Matias Laborde, wonderful Spanish colorist who had worked for Boom and IDW and a few other places, and he just wanted to color the page because he loved the page. And so he shared that page as kind of like fan art, and me being me and not wasting any opportunities to get this thing moving, I'm like, hey, do you want to color this book? He was like, yeah, and this is my price. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to add it as a stretch goal for this book, and if we can hit that, let's color it. And so people got behind us and loved his coloring, so they wanted it colored, and we nailed that stretch goal. During that process, Wicked Publishing, I guess, was out scouting and saw our work and really enjoyed it. And it's like, do you want to offer print copies from this? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's going to get more attention that way, I think. And so that's how I partnered with them. We spent a good few months hammering out the details on that, and we ran that campaign successfully, got it funded, finished issue 1, started issue number 2, at least on the line art end. And Matias finished coloring issue number 1. And partway through that, it just became unfeasible for Matias to keep being a comic book colorist and feed his family. And that sucks, because he is an amazing talent, but he just wasn't like out of Boom and IDW and these big places. He wasn't making enough. He wasn't getting enough gigs. And he's a beautiful, wonderful talent. It really bothers me. But he had to step away and go back to a kind of a classic office job. And so from there, we had to find a way to fill this incredible talent's shoes. And I'm a new creator. We just barely got this thing done. We get a print copy together to go send out and all of that. I'm just like, okay, well, now we gotta fill this out. And I'm like, I'm on a schedule, so I'm trying to like make a good impression and get this book out very quick. And so I'm going through colorists and I'm like checking out a bunch of different people, and I'm like, anybody who will look okay will work for me. And Max is like, no, we gotta find the right one. And I'm like, okay, I believe that, but we gotta keep this deadline. And eventually I was just like, okay, people are fine. We can wait. It's a first time campaign. Just breathe and find the right person. So eventually, after trying out like 4 colorists on the same page and me liking a couple, but none of them like nailing the vibe from the first issue, Maxie contacts me about somebody he was looking through, and it was Stephen Cannon, another incredible talent. And I was looking at his art and I wasn't so sure about it, but I was like, well, it is cleaner and gentler, and it is still that vibrancy that I wanted, which Maxie likes more gritty, grimier, earthy tones to his work than I really wanted for Jack. And so Steven steps on in, we try him out, and I'm looking at his page and I'm thinking, well, this is pretty damn good. But I'm not the biggest fan of it right away. I'm just kind of thinking of it, but I was like, this is pretty damn good. So I show it to Maxie, and Maxie's like, well, I can live with this. I like it. And I'm like, okay, well, he likes it. We're good. We're diving in. And then after looking at it for a while and getting used to it, man, I got blown away, and he's brought in more and more pages. It was an incredible journey. And that's how we met Steve. I guess I did skip. We did lose that original letterer in the issue number 1, issue 2 transition as well. And I ended up contacting somebody who did a wonderful piece of fan art for us, who could also letter. And so we've been working with Vince Rush since then on letters, and he does a stellar job. It's nothing like incredible or distracting, but it does stay like clean and always very smooth. And so that's, again, I just need a letterer that does it way better than me, and Vince nails it every time. But yeah, and then we've been that quartet kind of since. You also got to find a graphic designer, so I ran a fan art contest for a logo, and we found somebody for that who did the original Jack logo. And then he also had to step away from comics. So since issue number 3, we've had Nico Buffo, who's a friend of Maxie's down in Argentina, for the trade dresses, and now we have a nice clean set trade dress for all our issues. That's kind of been the bit. I mean, there's more members of the team, right? But that's the core bit of Jack Iron's Steel Cowboy, and that's kind of the journey, and we've been together since issue 2, and now we're on 4.
So, I mean, it sounds like listening to that at least particularly Maxie, but maybe others are. It seems like everybody's really involved in the whole creative process and in the decisions and how that all works. Is that true?
Well, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I want. That's been my bit. I'm a very hands-off project manager. Mainly, like like I said, the original bit was like when I was trying to hit a deadline because I was worried, but then eventually I was like, no, it'll happen how it needs to happen. Eventually, I could breathe. I don't really like my scripts. If you look at them, they aren't very heavy-handed. Maxie's done a lot of things to, like, he'll add a panel, take away a panel, turn 2 pages into a double-page spread, all of that. Whatever he's the storyteller of Ironverse, and I'm just kind of the narrator and guiding hand is the best way to say it. But he really does the storytelling bits of it. And so since that, and since being humbled by that, and watching how much better his expressions of what I'm trying to do are than even what I was imagining would be, it humbled me. And so I've been very kind of hands off and allow everything, colors as well, right? Same thing. Closest, like, I'm more hands-on is when I get the line art in. I'll re-script to the line art just so it fits better and flows better for what I intend. And sometimes there's some personality that Maxie adds that I can emphasize, little things like that. And then that rough lettering that I do goes to the letterer as like the lettering script. And so he follows that relatively closely, just actually makes the lettering work instead of my kind of messy lettering. But that's like the most hands-on I get with all of it. Of course, I deal with the business and marketing end, of course. But yeah, I mean, everybody's relatively involved pretty strongly, and I think the product always ends up so much better because of it.
That's pretty cool. We do something similar. I mean, mostly between us and our artists.
Mm.
There's a lot of that, where we'll come up with an idea on a script. We'll have this beautiful idea of how we want to. We have it all written out how we're going to do it just perfectly, and then we'll hand it over to Tosin, and he'll do something completely better than
Yep.
what we had in mind to begin with.
Yeah.
All the time. All the time.
So, I gotta ask this question about Jack Iron specifically. In the first issue, you refer to him having many. You use the word fathers or past lives, going back about 2,000 years, each bearing the reincarnated spirit that Jack Irons now possesses. It seems like he can clearly access the memories of all those lives, and I'm curious: are we at some point going to figure out why he remembers all of that so clearly?
Yeah, and I'm glad it's got it like it's a carrot on a stick for you with the series. 'Cause that's the point. That's the point. It's going to be slowly revealed. Issue number 5 is going to have like the biggest callback to issue number 1, but it's his constant journey. It's definitely things that are going to be explored the whole time because that's kind of his genesis, is where it came from, is dealing with that weight and being stuck with it, and maybe learning to respect it, learning to love it, whatever. There's a lot of ways to take it. There's a lot of potential, but absolutely.
Yeah, that kind of leads into the next thing I was going to ask. Immortality and reincarnation, it's just one of those abilities that's always fascinated me, and I don't think it's stretched to say that it is for you as well. But I feel like the heart of a good immortality story is showing how being able to live on forever weighs on the immortal. Or to quote the 12th Doctor, immortality isn't living forever. That's not what it feels like. Immortality is everyone else dying. And I think we've seen that that Jack has lost many people in his lives, and I feel like that has to weigh on him. How much would you say that sense of loss has affected who Jack becomes?
Well, I hope that's communicated, particularly in issue 2, where he gets kind of a callback to joining the bit. There's a good chunk in issue number 2 where Jack, I think the page starts with, "Well, you might be wondering where I was all this time," or something like that. Where the hell I was all this time, and he was wandering. He was just kind of existing. He was lost in self-pity. Because of that weight, because of those burdens and the inability to ever escape them, as far as he can tell. And there are still things core to him as a person, as a human being, that matter to him. And he stumbles across this little girl named Sarah, and that reminds him of that and helps bring him back to the fold and back to an awareness. Now he's still ready to kind of dodge that awareness until issue number 3, where a closest thing to a brother that he's ever had kind of shows back up and tries to, he's studying him, and maybe knocks a little bit of sense into him, and then adds another carrot to the stick for Jack to actually go and check something out that maybe he, and only he, almost can go and check out without any risk. He needs to go into hell, and an immortal can go into hell. Most of the regular people, not so easy. Not so easy.
Yeah, I can totally see that, and Jack is definitely qualified for that. I did have another question about that issue, and particularly about the Native American background. Now, one of Jack's lives takes place in the late 1700s, with Jack being raised by both Native and American fathers, so that's another aspect of the many fathers thing. But I had noticed that Jack's middle name is Nathaniel, and that made me think of Natty Bumppo, a.k.a. Hawkeye from Last of the Mohicans. And I noticed a couple of other parallels. Was that an intentional influence, or am I reading too much into it?
Slightly intentional. It wasn't directly. I don't know if I had heard the name. I was just like Jonathan Nathaniel Irons as a name, but there is some Last of the Mohicans in there, very much so. That's another. It's a pseudo western, right? It's a little bit before that period, but it's still got a lot of those tropes to it. It's a little bit more romantic than what I do in Jack, though. It wasn't directly, but there is a little bit of that. There is, for sure.
So, my question in issue 2 there, you really start to blend together the stories and the histories and the mythologies in that one with the, I don't want to give too much away, but I'm particularly curious about the Old West stuff, and particularly the Native Americans. It seems like you're inspired by maybe a specific tribe. I was wondering if there was a specific group you're emulating there.
Well, personally, I have a lot, and it's not blood relatives, but I have a lot of the family I've had since I was a kid are Tiwa, people of the Red Willow up here in northern New Mexico at the Taos Pueblo. So I spent a lot of my youth with those wonderful people, and so did my parents. My dad, he spent a lot of time with the Blackfoot tribe, but. Honestly, like in issue 1, the native tribe that's dealing with is part of the Lakota Confederation. So it's nothing like overly specific. I try to be respectful because those specifics can be very the word that comes to mind is sacred to these people.
Totally.
So I tried to be as respectful and confer more my personal experiences and what I got out of the wonderful cultures I've experienced more than the actual like expression of the culture, because that's not, it's not my place. But so there's a lot of that for sure, but nothing so specific, but nothing so out of touch, like Makoa Trusen, I believe, is no, it's gonna bug me. He's either Cheyenne or Crow, and it really bugs me that I don't remember right now. I believe it's Cheyenne. So there's a lot of that where I wasn't trying to treat it as one amalgamation, but I also didn't want to get that specific because it would limit a lot of the storytelling potential. So I tried to be respectful, but also, I'm conveying again my experiences more than truth.
That's totally understandable, and I think it's really good that you're like drawing more from experience where possible. That's really interesting. But I also kind of wonder, what is your research process for things that are outside of your experience dealing with Jack Irons? Particularly like talking about the historical time periods like ancient Greece or Sumeria and whatnot.
Again, my experience, what I've come across. That's why, like in issue 1's original printing, I wanted it to be Athens, which did have kings at a point, and they did have co-kings at one point, but it was a very short period. Most of the time, they've been a form of democracy, and so a lot of people like that pulled them out of the story. Because they knew Athens was there, and I had originally wrote it at Sparta, but then Sparta was so trope heavy and implied a lot of different militant angles that the more Ares aspect than the Athena aspect than I wanted to convey. But eventually I was like, well, if it's pulling people out of the story, then it's not serving its purpose. So
and I think it also makes Jack a little less stereotypical. Like, yeah, he's a big tough guy. Of course he was a Spartan. And I think making him from Athens is different than that.
It was, but again, we did bow to not continuity, but to folks' experience. Again, I didn't want it pulling readers out, and it was pulling some readers out very specifically. So in future, like after the first printing, it's been Sparta. It's gone back to Sparta because they did have co-kings as well.
So I gotta say, one of my favorite parts of how you're doing this with the blending of things is your version of the four horsemen of Revelation. You mentioned you kind of make them in this. There's definitely an Ironverse twist to them that makes them all your own, I think. But I mean, you mentioned a Lovecraftian kind of an idea, but I mean, how much of the Revelation side of that is involved in there?
It bleeds in quite a bit. It's been weird how like the writing goes on with time, but not terribly directly. The end of issue 4, we quote a small passage that also Johnny Cash quotes, right? But there's been a little bit here and there. but nothing so direct, because there's a few definite changes between the biblical sense and the more pop culture sense, which is what I mainly take from the pop culture end of it. Even where we went with their character designs and such, we wanted to be more instantly recognizable as their what they are like, but also, again, like you said, have our own twist on them. And again, it's there's a lot of it there in the background, but it's more to serve as flavor and gravitas than how we're approaching the storytelling. I think that's the best way I could say it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that totally makes sense. I can see that. It's definitely going in its own direction, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. Now, looking at issue 2, I'm kind of noticing that at this point we start seeing Jack soften a little bit, and we start seeing a little bit of compassion under the steel exterior, and we already talked a little bit about Sarah, but I feel like it kind of displays what may be Jack's core conflict, which is that he wants to care about people, but he's afraid of hanging around anybody too long to get attached to them. Would you say that was kind of like at the back of his mind during his big talk with the elder towards the end of that issue?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's that whole bit. How do we keep moving? And I guess we both got a long time to figure it out. That's exactly one of the main core conflicts. Again, and it made a lot of logical sense to me. And as you spoke of the doctor there, it's the same kind of idea. It's that all this weight of, if you're becoming attached to these people and you know that they are going to be almost like candle flickers, it's going to go very quickly. And then you have, in Jack's case, a bunch of previous life memories as well, where it's been part of that as before, where he would actually pass alongside them eventually. That all of this weight and love and hope and all the deepest emotion, hate even, right? That's there, that eventually, like, you kind of maybe want to take a break from it. And that's kind of where we find Jack at the beginning of issue 2, well, middle of issue 2, beginning of issue 2. Our main framing device for the first arc of Jack 1 through 3 is him sitting at a bar after this, recounting it, and kind of a Forrest Gump kind of framing device. And so at that point, he is more invested. He's actually back in towns. He's interacting with people. He's rambling to somebody who might not care to listen, but he is still reaching out and telling his tale, and humanity's tale. Which again is kind of supposed to be pretty close to one and the same. And with issue 4, we're moving more into the adventure aspect. But before that, of course, that's why, seeing this little girl out in the middle of nowhere by herself with loss and no way to survive, that's a core, like, patriarchal human sense to at least take her home, take her to someplace where she can be safe, because you're here in that time. It's kind of your duty. And so that's what does it. And he goes back and he gets a talking to from one of the other women he's saved as a little girl, Kitty McIntyre, the sheriff of New Deadwood, basically the highest ranking human being alive. From there, he kind of remembers these connections, and he wanders off when it bears too much. And they have quite a conversation about that in issue number 3.
Okay. Now, I will get into another relationship, probably the one relationship where he doesn't have to worry about anyone dying, but it goes wrong in a different way. You mentioned his brother earlier, so I'm going to try not to ask you to spoil too much, or try to do that myself, but I found it fascinating. But one thing that I found it interesting is that the brother that we see in the flashbacks seems to act a bit differently than the ones that we see in the more present-day sequences. But he seems to recall Jack really well. And I also kind of like the cultural conflict between the two. Is there anything more that you could tell us about this character without spoiling too much? And can we expect to see more of that relationship and how he changed in the later issues?
Significantly, and yes. So the being known in modern, like, current Ironverse Comics times, known as Tracker, he and Jack, there's a few of these odd blips in human history of these immortals, and there is Jack and Tracker that we've met so far, Micaiah Trucent, and Micaiah, as he got older, he doesn't have the past life memories that Jack does. So it changed him in different ways than how Jack changed. And so that eventually in issue 3, as you saw, causes a rift. It causes a split where Jack just like, I can't deal with this. But they tried for a long time. They finally found something where a person that isn't going to disappear. So they try and have that connection. They try and build something out of that connection. And when it goes wrong, it left a more sour taste on Tracker than it did on Jack. And whereas Jack kind of forsook humanity and just kind of wallowed, Tracker forsook humanity, but in a quest for power. And as that grows, we'll see. But Tracker, Earth's Top Predator, or Tracker Top Predator is what his short is called. He has quite a bit coming. He's probably the first he's the first introduced hopeful spin-off character in Ironverse Comics, whereas Catch Coyote was the first to kind of come in from the outside and work almost towards the middle from Jack work in a different way. Tracker is the first that kind of has his own mechanics and his own wants and desires alongside Jack. And I've tried to just kind of hint that something's going on in issue 3. And throughout the second arc, we're going to see a little bit more of what he was hinting at and why.
Nice. I guess you would say then that he is kind of like a dark mirror of Jack in some ways.
Yeah, that was a big part of what I was doing with that. Exactly.
Okay. And I think kind of beyond that, and I think you kind of touched on it earlier, the one of the things that I kind of noticed getting, into the later issues is that, we start seeing a found family approach sort of emerging, both with the brother, even though they're estranged, and also with Sarah and then the other character, Kitty, who seems to be like almost in a way what Sarah might become in the future when she gets older. And I was kind of noticing that, was the found family idea on your mind from the start? And how much would you say that it contributes to Jack's character arc going forward?
It's been there from the start because it's part of me as well. Only child, just my parents, and then they had friends, they had family, and then of course my friends who became my family, even my animals who became my family, right? So that's kind of a core of like who I am. So that was going to work its way into Jack one way or another. But I think also it's sort of logical for, again, a long-lived character whose bloodline that's something that people have asked me to touch on is like, can he sire? And I haven't touched on that, and I'm saving that for down the road. But that is definitely core, and it's kind of core to how I was approaching the story structure as well. How New Deadwood functions as a found family, all these refugees, alien refugees, how remnants of humanity who wander in from the wastes come in are adopted and protected under the New Deadwood reservation. It's very much a core. Finding your place, even if it's not through blood, it's definitely core to Jack.
I think that's totally something. I mean, I think most people can probably relate to that in some fashion. I mean, that's a great idea to have in your character arc. That really works cool. But I gotta say, I was not sure what to expect going into this. I guess I was thinking Jack Irons was something along the lines of a sci-fi western, and I think there is some truth to that. But to describe it that way after reading issues 1 through 3 feels like talking about a cup of water out of a lake. That is to say, there's a lot more going on in the Ironverse when you consider the enormous amalgamated world of myths and alt history and world building you put into each issue. I'm particularly impressed by your ability to convey a lot of world building information in a way that feels very natural. It's not like a big info dump. It's a well manicured narration, and it's really easy to follow and has a great premise. I mean, Jack's just talking to a guy in a bar. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, I gotta ask. I mean, Have you actually taken any classes, read some books, or studying on writing or writing comics specifically?
I mean, since yes, I've read since. So not when I started, and not even like issue 3. Like since issue 3, I've read a couple books on particularly what's back there. Give me a second. Scott McCloud. I've read a couple of his books. But
Understanding
honestly,
Comics, yeah, that's
yes, understanding comics and making comics. I think those are two. There's a third one, but it's a little bit more esoteric. I think it has more to do with art than general comics. But nonetheless, no, not really. I've always had like a flair. So part of what helps carry those info dumps, and some people it lands better than others. I'm glad it landed well with you. Is I love words, and I love poetic words. I love very descriptive words. I love underused words, and so I think that helps keep it a bit more entertaining, a bit more descriptive, a bit more. It's tough to describe, but that'll work. So I think that's part of the flow, right? And doing it in a narrative capacity, like I did with that framing device, allowed me to have it more spoken than, I don't know, like if you're reading it in prose or something, where it could feel a lot more heavy, where it's not just. And I think I did okay doing the jumping around as well, and that can be very difficult. But no, I don't have any like education on that. No.
Well, I will say that you probably managed to fool me on that, and it looks like maybe Mike as well. I will say that I appreciate how effortlessly the story blends genre elements while feeling primarily like a Western. And I will say the samurai element fits perfectly with that because they've always had this connection. But moving on.
No, that was the bingo. I like doing that's part of Jack too. Part of why I chose Jack, besides the name Jack, besides the American and Western folklore connotations, which I really wanted, was Samurai Jack. I wanted to do that little spaghetti Western taken from a, even though it was not an Eastern influence. It just, I thought that was kind of fun, kind of like what the spaghetti Westerns did with the Kurosawa films.
Yeah, that's cool. How do you and your team manage to keep the tone and style consistent with all the different genre elements, that you're using, from like Road Warrior to, Sword and Sandals and things like that?
I don't know.
No, it's just what feels right.
No, I think what it is it's got a very solid foundation in what we're trying to tell. It's got very strong intent, and it's got great an amazing storyteller behind it. With Maxie's artwork, he's able to make those things work, and I think my scripts do handle the blending, because I use those genre elements for very specific reasons. They're not just used, right? They're not just there for flavor. They're there for intent. Again, the cowboy, I wanted that very specific influence in it. Even him wearing metal, so he has a little bit of chivalrous intent, a little bit of knighthood feel to him. Yeah. I wanted that. There's like some
the
very
gunslinger.
Exactly, and having it be a little bit more Mad Maxy, a little bit rougher looking armor that also kind of denotes his character, right? And the character design has been one of the things we've been praised with the most, because it's very strong and very evocative of what the character is. And so we again, I tend to use, when I'm writing, I'm using those genre elements very specifically, and I think that's why it works. One reviewer described it as, if I remember the quote, Mr. Fernandez has used a shotgun when he should have used a sniper rifle. Nonetheless, he hit his target, and so that I think that kind of explains it.
That definitely paints a picture, let me tell you. Of course, I want to get into Jack Irons' The Steel Cowboy #4. I mean, why don't you tell us about your campaign, what people can get, what's going on with this new Indiegogo campaign?
Well, we're doing all right. We're moving forward. I think we're at about 31% as of this recording, which is honestly pretty dang good, since we're asking for $13,500, $13,500 to get this done. That is what it costs. You can go ahead and check it out on Indiegogo. I break down what the prices go to. But with issue #4, we're starting a transition to a different type of storytelling. We have finished the introductory trilogy, which was more of a thought experiment, and more of. So we're not losing that behind. I can't escape that. It's kind of the point of Jack. It's a lot of thinking. But with issue number 4, story wise, we are finally diving into the Four Horsemen's territory. In this case, Famine Inc.'s territory. I framed it out of 2 very old tales, one from the east and one from the west. From the west, it's got a bit of Dante's Inferno as we travel through layers of hell, in 4 layers of hell in particular. And
Can I just say hell yeah to that?
All right. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And then the actual structure, what I'm discussing with, I guess is the best way, and it fits perfectly with what we're doing with Jack, is the 4 Sights of the Buddha. People are familiar with that story. It was when Siddhartha became aware of life outside the palace and the human condition. So it's kind of what we're doing with Jack, is that he's been gone for a long time, and he hasn't faced what he never faced. It's what our tagline for this is: help us face galactic Armageddon, because Jack's going in and he's finally looking it in the eye after a very long period of time. And so we will encounter 4 different aspects of that in issue 4. And hopefully we'll come out with a little bit of hope and a little bit of fun and a whole lot of awesome artistry. Our books are, since issue number 2, have been 32 pages of story content and 16 pages of bonus content, so it'll be a 48-page floppy, so a relatively large floppy comic book. You can snag 1 through 4 right now through there physically. There's only about 100 of that bundle. I think 17 are gone as of this recording. So if you're interested in grabbing all of them, now's the time. Also, you can get a little wooden standee. We sold all the original art, so you're out of luck in that until maybe later in the campaign. There are the only other big tier is a hand painted 4-inch resin figure, which I hand paint and do a certificate of authenticity and all that. I live stream the painting if you want to interact or guide me how you want it painted. And there's digital tiers, of course, to grab all 4 issues. There's a digital tier just for number 1, just for issue 4. There's a tier just to grab issue number 1 if you just want issue number 1 with its digital. We tried to have something as an entry point for everybody. And if you're still unsure and you're listening to this and you're like, well, this is intriguing, but I don't want to put any money down, you can go to ironversecomics.com, and we offer issue number 1 free to read on Global Comics. And you can see if it's for you. If you like issue number 1, you'll probably like 2, 3, and 4.
So that's awesome. How long do you plan for Jack to keep going? Do you have an ending in mind, or are you just going for as long as you have stories to tell with him?
So it is an ongoing series. By all intent, I hope to be able to pass the mantle to another writer or set of writers. Jack's history is massive, and his future is equally massive. So there's a lot of ground to cover, a lot of potential. But we do have an end to all of Ironverse Comics. We've had it planned forever. So if there comes a time where it feels necessary or correct to pull that trigger, we have a beautiful ending to all of it that kind of speaks to what the intent of the entire effort of Ironverse Comics, the imprint, what it's trying to do is. And so there is an end, but our hope is I won't get to see it.
That would be ideal. Now, Cody, would you like to talk to us about anything else you've got coming up? Is there anything that you want to explore either in Jack's universe or with other projects that you want to share? And just for fun, since you feature some crossover art in the book, is there anybody you'd like to see Jack crossover with?
So crossovers are tough. Most of those have been from other folks, and I kind of count it as fan art. It's not that I don't love the idea of crossovers. It's just it's tough to work with Jack. He's a very, there's a lot of intent behind the character, so you have to nail that intent. So I have written 1 crossover script with a certain individual that I would love to see manifest, but it takes time, and we'll see how that comes together. So far, it's the only thing I've seen that I would like to see move forward in that. But there's been a lot of amazing pieces. I'm so grateful for every single one and all the time and interest we get. But otherwise, what we're doing is, so there's like I think there's about 7 titles planned under Ironverse Comics right now. 2 or 3 technically are in production. This third one kind of came out of nowhere, and I love it, and it's still kind of a secret, so I can't say much about it. But sooner or later, I believe during this campaign, folks will see it, and it'll be a nice little surprise. And it might be a real nice surprise with number 4. Just so keep an eye out, folks. Keep an eye out. But Cactus Coyote, of course, I've loved his work forever. He has 20 arcs planned for that, and not just planned. I think he has at least 15 of them written. He's a prolific screenwriter kind of guy, so that's what he does. He just bolts down and writes. So that's been wonderful working with him. He's the enigmatic mangaka Dollar Coins. He is co-editor at Ironverse Comics, and he's helped forge our cosmos and kept myself on track. And you can read his first effort, his manga, also for free on ironversecomics.com. If folks are curious what we're doing a little bit in the future, what Jack Irons is doing, and we're working towards the middle and a connection. Otherwise, the few other titles I talked about a lot when I started out, thinking that I could get that moving quicker. So I've quieted down on those a bit. Of course, I mentioned Tracker Top Predator before. I've had an 8-page short I wanted to include in issue 3, but just couldn't due to financing. But that still has Vincent Rush attached to the line art. He has a wonderful early kind of 90s style to him, and I love that script very much. It is one of those dialogue list scripts that's pretty much all action and flow, so I'd love to see if we could pull that off. But there are a few other titles in the works I'd love to see. There's a title that explores more of the eastern side of the apocalypse that I'd love to see manifest as well. It's got a couple scripts sitting. There's a Horseman's Child I want to see move in. There's a lot of cool stuff in the works, but we need your help to face Galactic Armageddon. It's the only way we can do it. This isn't it's a passion project, absolutely. But so much so, it doesn't run on our own fumes. I can give it a little bit of gas here and there myself, but it's pretty much always been manifested by the wonderful readers and fans and folks like you two who take the time to listen and share and enjoy our work.
Awesome. That sounds really cool. You got me kind of drooling over here. So we're actually about out of time for this interview, but we want to thank you for coming on the show and talking with us about your comics.
Oh, absolutely. Jack Irons is something special, and it's been fun just talking about what you have coming out. So thanks for coming on to chat some comics with us.
Well, thank you folks again so much for having me, and thank your listeners for listening to me jaw on. There's something I'm good at. It's usually that.
Before we go, I was hoping you could tell everybody where they can find you and your books online.
All right. Well, specifically, if you want to interact with me, the most interactive I am are on 2 platforms: Twitter @Cowboy_Steel or @Ironverse Comics. Either of those tags will reach me. Also, handles will reach me. Also, Ironverse Comics on YouTube. Or if you're kind of forgetful and don't remember any of that, you can go to ironversecomics.com. Up at the contact section up at the top of the page, we have all our listings on all the social media platforms that we're on, which is most of them. And we'd love to hear from you. And, of course, our free reads are on there as well. So if you want to take a dive, that's the best place to figure out if it's for you.
All right, awesome. For our listeners, we want you to know that not only do we recommend that you go out and back Jack Irons #4 on Indiegogo, Steve and I have already backed it on behalf of Omen Comics and Revelation Comics ourselves, so we're walking the talk here. Jack Irons is a fun character, and this is a fun story. As a comic book writer, I can tell you that this is a well thought out and well written and brilliantly produced story. But if I might give a word of caution, if you see Jack Irons as Steel Cowboy, you can do a lot of things to him. Even make him get a little pungy in his boot. But you'd best say howdy, because he doesn't take too kindly to folks that don't. We'll be back with ORP episode in just a couple of days, but you'll see us next month for another episode of our Indie Comic Spotlight. I hope you've had fun hanging out with us today on ORP. I know that Steve and I have had fun making this episode. If you've had fun too, we invite you to share this episode and help us get the word out.
For our Spotify listeners, we ask you to please rate our show as well. That can really help to grow our audience. But to all our listeners everywhere, we want to say thank you for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.